How should one live? How should one live? I've been haunted by that question since I was about 9 years old, and my Greek grandmother, my yaya, gave me a collection of Plato's Socratic dialogues. And I was haunted in a good way by what Socrates said in Plato's Republic, that any question we investigate should help us further along in that journey to answer that question of questions. How should one live? I've been brought up on two Greek words. I have them tattooed on my arm. You can't see them, but arete and meraki, to live a life of soul and passion dedicated towards creating a world of all-around excellence in which duty to self and duty to others go hand in glove. But it wasn't until my latter part of my 30s that I hit upon what my service should be. It was a time of great intolerance and division and polarization in the United States shortly before the impeachment proceedings got underway in the second term of Bill Clinton's presidency. And anytime I turned on a radio or talk show program that was billed as a discourse or exchange or dialogue, it was anything but. It was people hammering one another, having at it, hammer and tongs, interrupting, browbeating, insulting. He who or she who put down the other the most won, whatever that could amount to. And I felt as a student of democracy in Athens that the same pernicious patterns were repeating themselves now as they had back then. I have dual U.S. Greek citizenship, and my grandmother, who immigrated through Ellis Island and then settled in the Tampa Bay region to become the first teacher of Greek language and culture there, really helped me understand that open societies typically have a period of ascent, of stasis, and then deep decline because people close in on themselves. Even though it wasn't a pandemic like a virus, people nonetheless could go out, but they still were silos. They didn't care to hear what others had to say. They didn't care to understand people's stories. It was their way or the highway. And I think that we are creatures of habit, but we can change even our worst habits if we want to. And I felt that we had to start again the habit of democratizing, more specifically of Socratizing, where we thoroughly engage one another and make the heartfelt attempt to bridge the chasm between one human being and another. So I felt finally in my latter 30s, after a flourishing career as a freelance writer for national magazines with a forte of writing about unsung heroes, people steeped in social conscience, that I'd find my thing. And so one day, I walked into a nondescript mall, cafe section of a chain bookstore, and I asked the community events coordinator if I could start a group in which we engaged in timely and timeless philosophical questions as a way of discovering commonality, what I would call uncommon common ground, so that the next time we do have at it with political hot button issues, we might know one another better in ways that we realize even if we differ on and diverge on concrete issues, we still might care enough about one another, feel connected with one another, feel that Greek term philia with all of our being, of connectedness, of loving, caring connectedness, of a kind of friendship that spills over into community and to society that had gone by the wayside in the United States, where we no longer felt like we were one another's brothers and sisters keeper. And that Socrates could show us the way. And so this was awakened with me at a time when I felt like I needed somehow to find my thing that would help me be more part of the solution than the problem. The events coordinator said, yes, this is great. Let's do it. What do you want to call it? What a question. I hadn't thought about that. I blurted out Socrates Cafe. She loved it. 2 weeks later, about a baker's dozen of us, about 13 of us, gathered around some tables. I didn't know these people. They didn't know one another, but they had read the announcement. We all came together. I didn't even know what question to pose. And a professional woman came, a little hairy, just the end of her workday. She goes, Socrates says in Plato's Apology that the unexamined life is not worth living. She goes, I examined my life to death. It hasn't made my life more worth living. So what in the world did he mean? And so we began sort of having at it as a group, exploring our philosophies of how we can go about examining our lives in ways that do make it more worth living. How can we explore the world in which we live and our role in it in ways that are not just purely past dwelling or inbrooding, but that we really have a forward-looking lens as well, where it's a healthy mix of them all. And lo and behold, we discover that this kind of inquiry itself is one way. This use of the Socratic method in ways that require us, make us want to, inspire us to listen to one another, to hear one another out, to do away with non-redemptive argument and debate, and just explore and inquire together, turning on those childlike, but by no means childish questioning lenses, is at the heart and soul of creating a vibrant democracy. Because it's these public gatherings where we do so out of our own desire, and we have the chutzpah to share our points of view and to support why we think what we do with our story, with evidence of a sort, that makes us advance further along roads that can make life more worth living for all because we feel more connected. And so after 2 hours of really rigorous philosophizing, people spontaneously broke into applause at that first gathering. It was a happening, and they were moved. And so we kept gathering together. We kept using this iteration of the Socratic method that I came to call the Socrates Cafe method, in which we pose questions, but we explore them in unique ways. If we ask, how can we overcome alienation? We don't just launch into this thing about, well, how do we overcome? But we look at the assumptions. Do we always want to overcome alienation? If so, what kinds? And what do we mean by overcoming? What's the process involved? And are there some kinds of alienation that we wouldn't want to overcome, that we would actually want to channel, absorb within, as some of our greatest artists and writers have done throughout time? And musicians as well. And so we looked at these things in careful and thoughtful ways. We arrived at no conclusions. We scratched the surface, sort of, but in ways that were wondrous and made us want to keep gathering and inquiring together. And so it is that even as we moved over to a cozy coffee house in Montclair, New Jersey, close to where I live, we kept gathering every Tuesday night. That Montclair, New Jersey gathering still meets every Tuesday night after all these years, right now through Zoom. And it became something that resonated and touched a chord with people far and wide. And now we have about 500 of these groups, Socrates Cafe and other kind of kindred versions, Democracy Cafe, Cafe Shakespeare, Constitution Cafe, philosophers clubs for when they're just for children and youth. But it has become something that has resonated and touched a chord, and that heaven knows the world needs more of it now than ever, if we're going to stay connected in ways that might make us want to feel more and more like we're our brothers and sisters keepers, that we have each other's backs, especially many people with whose views we may differ, that we may diverge from, but nonetheless we feel a shared sense of we're in this together, that we're fellow human beings, and we want what's best for one and all, not just for our families, not just in our little bubble, but we're constantly expanding the circle. There, soon after I started Socrates Cafe, a reporter for the New York Times did a feature about it. She came by and saw us sitting in an animated semicircle, wondered what was going on, and did a feature. So I started getting emails and letters from people in prison, in nursing homes, in senior centers, at schools, from people who said, look, it's great that you're doing this at a cafe. We can't come to a cafe. Can you bring the cafe to us? And so half credit card will travel. I spent probably $20,000 traveling to wherever people were who wanted to do this, just asking them to make the commitment of doing this in an ongoing way. And I was more than willing to foot the bill to go there and show them. Because I didn't want this to be the cult of personality all about Chris Phillips. I wanted this to be something that would grow and spread over time, to the point that now, 25 years later, we have Socrates cafes in Mumbai, India. We have Socrates cafes throughout Saudi Arabia. We have Socrates cafes in Australia, Socrates cafes in Guatemala, in Brazil. Throughout Mexico, where I spend a great deal of time engaging in Socratic inquiry with indigenous groups, thanks to being enlightened by my now wife, Ceci. We're together now 25 years. Ceci is a longtime indigenous rights activist. She had been living in an indigenous community before I met her at the Socrates Cafe in Montclair, when one night she was the only one to come, and we discussed the question, what is love? I fell in love. She's been my life partner ever since. And it's been a joy to engage with people and to bring people together in ways that almost naturally are philia cauldrons. Whether you have 2 PhDs or you've never set foot in the hallowed halls, whether you're 7 or 107, you come together and you share your unique store of wisdom as fellow equal human beings all in this together. I have found that no one has more enlightened me and helped me chart out new paths for how one should live than children and youth. Quite often, children and youth who've never been able to go to school, who can't read, but yet have extraordinary stores of wisdom and profundity that it behooves me to put myself in situations where I can learn from them. Whether I'm huddled with kids in Soweto, South Africa, or in Chiapas, Mexico, where I meet regularly with young people, I want to tell you about one dialogue in particular I had that's with a young indigenous child, 9 years old at the time. Her name's Veruch in her language of Tzotzil, Vero or Veronica in Spanish or English. One time I gathered with them, our weekly gatherings, and I threw out the question, what is a good human being? Thinking like with kids in the West, they would say, well, a good human being has this quality and this quality and this quality, and just sort of tick them off like a check marks. Instead, Veruch said, well, I can't tell you what a good human being is, Christopher, but I can tell you what a true human being is. I said, well, okay, please do tell me about that. And so Veruch said, well, a true human being in our Mayan belief system is a Batzil Vinik. It's somebody, she said, you see, Christopher, you enter the world as a human being, according to our beliefs. But to be a true human being, you have to demonstrate through qualities, through actions, that you are one. And I said, okay, well, tell me about that. Now thinking that she would tick these names off, these qualities off. And she said, a true human being, Christopher, is someone when I'm trying to sell them one of my hand-woven goods, a pulsera, a bracelet, a pendiente, a necklace, or a belt, a cinturón, that they at least say, no, thank you, with a kind look on their face, look at me directly in the eyes, even if they don't buy anything. Like you did, Christopher, she said, that day when you'd already bought so many things from other kids, you couldn't afford to buy anything else from me. And she said, that's how we became friends, because you recognized me. And it was such an epiphany moment for me, because she's right. She's saying so many tourists and locals just literally try to push me over. They've made me fall down before. They treat me as less than invisible, as almost subhuman. They're not true human beings by our outlook, she says. And so I realized that Veruch is a kindred spirit of one of our foremost philosophers, Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt believed and wrote about in The Human Condition that we enter the world as human beings, but that we must have a second birth to become what Veruch called a true human being, a Batzil Vinik, that we must do everything we can to make sure that everybody has a place as an equal at the civic political table. And she said, and Arendt wrote, those who try to deliberately keep people down, those who deliberately try to keep people off that civic political table are also keeping themselves from growing as they should. That they can't fully flourish unless they're doing everything they can to make sure everybody has a place. And so you have to chip away at those walls of divides and disconnectedness to become a true human being, or to bring about what Arendt called that second birth. And so that's what I've been trying to do now for 25 years. Ceci and I, through our nonprofit, Socrates Cafe, our website's at socratescafe.com. We have a guide on how you can start a group and a drop-down list of a directory of all of our groups around the world. And they exist everywhere, hundreds of them. It's more important now than ever in this time of not just pandemic and confinement, but that once again, we're closing in on ourselves. People are using social media to disconnect, to insult. Children and youth can show us the way because they're so thoughtful in ways that can help us adults learn again how to listen to one another, how to want to hear one another's stories, in our case, just using philosophical inquiry into timely and timeless questions as the pretext for sharing stories. Socrates had said in Plato's Apology, when he was about to drink the hemlock, he had told his friends who were around him, who were crying because they knew that because of these trumped up charges and his death sentence for impeding corruption in the youth, that his life was over. But they asked him, how can we make sure that we can resuscitate and keep alive and keep the flame burning of this kind of inquiry that can make life more worth living? And Socrates said, keep doing it. Keep doing what I've been doing. Keep modeling it for others, that you can be your own best questioner, your most expert thinker, that you don't have to look to some know-it-all guru, but that you can engage in that transformative act with thoughtful others week in and week out of inquiring together. And that's how you can help make sure my life was worth living. And so it is today that Socrates has resonated across the ages and cultures. Back to me, with dual Greek citizenship. My family's from a tiny volcanic island in Nisyros, Greece. And I try to carry that torch myself, because it's my way of trying to establish and model kinds of listening and thinking and inquiry and exploration that makes life more worth living for one and all. Ever since my father's tragic death nearly 10 years ago, I felt more inspired than ever. I carry my father on my shoulder. I carry my forebears on my shoulders. It's light. It makes me want to leave, in whatever time I have, this legacy that Socrates touched me with, of making life more worth living for one and all.